We are going on to 2 weeks into free agency in the NFL offseason here, and there is a ton to talk about on all the changes on the Buffalo Bills roster. The biggest move by the Bills so far was the biggest addition, let's say anyway, was the signing of Curtis Samuel, receiver from Washington. Katherine, let's start there as we assess first what has happened on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, a bit of a splash by Brandon Beane to bring in Samuel on a 3-year deal. He was interesting to talk to, just kind of what his expectations are. His familiarity with Joe Brady, I think, is so huge. He had him in Carolina when both were with the Panthers there. Samuel was drafted by Brandon Beane there. So there's familiarity around the organization, but I think the Brady connection is really key. He was talking about how he's seen different ways Joe Brady will make the most of guys, scheme them up to get them to their full potential. And I mean, Samuel had his most productive season in most ways that year. So looks like they work together very well.
Yeah, and this is a significant move for the for the receiving core. Samuel, 4.31 speed when he came into the NFL. Gabe Davis is out as expected, signing with Jacksonville. Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, Nyheim Hines, all off from the receiving core. None of those a surprise. Samuel, now the question is, what does this mean for the draft? We'll get in a little more about that later on this podcast. But, Samuel can play the slot or the flanker position. He saw a ton, like 70 to 74% of his snaps the last 2 years in Washington from the slot. His year with Brady, it was 60% from the slot. So, they certainly could play with Diggs, Samuel, and Shakir on the field a lot of the time. Obviously, they could use a big X receiver on the outside, a receiver with size. They signed Mac Hollins, who is a big 6'4" guy, but he's a number 5, number 6. He's going to make the team as the number 5 or 6 receiver. So the question is, that we would expect them to add another big receiver, but the signing of Samuel makes it, I think, not a priority. They don't have to do it with the 28th pick.
Yeah, I think that's been such an interesting, debate already of what are they going to do with that pick? Will they go receiver? Will they not? And like you said, this doesn't rule out that they still want to add to that receiving core. It just changes how much of a priority it is. Elsewhere on the offense, what did you make of Mitch Morse being let go? I was a little surprised by that, even though I understand the business standpoint of it.
I was surprised because they could have kept him and saved money. So, and he obviously wanted to be back. So that was a surprise. But obviously, I trust Aaron Kromer. He's a good coach. He is an outstanding offensive line coach. So, I don't think anybody expected them to, if they're going to move on from Morse, they would have kept Ryan Bates, but they moved on from both of them, trading Bates to Chicago. So I think the priority here was they wanted to clear room. And so that was more of a priority, and they saved the maximum amount they could in getting rid of Morse. So it's Connor McGovern at center. They bring back David Edwards to play guard. And, on a big move, they extend Deion Dawkins, giving him a pay raise and saving money against the salary cap. So I think they worked harder to create space than maybe something I expected them to. And they also, and I give them credit for this, were unsentimental about some of the moves they made, including saying goodbye to Morse.
The Bills' biggest addition probably came on offense, as we mentioned already, but they made so many moves on defense, starting with letting a lot of guys go right before the free agency mark. Let's dive into some of those. It's going to be a lot of turnover on the defense this year.
Yeah, and as I said in our last segment, unsentimentality is, in my view, the key word on how they have approached this. They have decided, we have lost in the divisional round now the last 3 years. We are not running it back. So they could have kept Tre'Davious White in some way, shape, or form tried to keep him at a lower cap figure. They could have kept Jordan Poyer and lowered his cap figure. Instead, they ripped off the Band-Aids, get maximum cap relief, bid goodbye to both of those guys who were, really great players for this franchise. And overhaul. I mean, really overhaul is the defense is being overhauled to a degree here. They lost Leonard Floyd as we expected, lost Tre'Davious White, lost Poyer. Micah Hyde is a free agent, certainly not going to be back. They lose Dane Jackson, a good player. Other people who they bid goodbye to, Terrell Dodson, Poona Ford, Tim Settle, Saran Neal, Tyler Matakevich, Linval Joseph, Shaq Lawson, Jordan Phillips. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah, at this moment as we record, none of those guys coming back. It's been a lot of turnover for sure. Now they did extend Taron Johnson was their most recent move. He's going to be a big leader on the defense for sure, as he has been in the past. But when we talked to him, he was saying he knows he'll need to be a little more vocal, especially in the secondary, just given all the turnover there. Bringing back Daquan Jones, that's something I was thinking they should do and kind of expecting, but it happened at like 1 a.m. last week. So a middle of the night move, but I think was one of the key pieces of the defense to bring back when you're looking at how many guys have left.
Huge, no doubt. I mean, especially because they were cleared out all. They were ground zero at defensive tackle after Ed Oliver. So bringing back Jones was a huge move, and they were looking at if they didn't do something at defensive tackle, they were going to have to take a defensive tackle in the first or second round. So that takes that. Lessens that priority. They still need defensive tackles. Bringing to AJ Epinesa back was a good, fortunate move at not too expensive a cost. And they still will. Defensive end is still a priority. Defensive tackle priority. They bring back Taylor Rapp to be one of the two starting safeties. You mentioned Taron Johnson. I mean, I think he's been here in Buffalo since 2018. He signs for 3 more years. If he plays another 3 years healthy, I think he's a Wall of Famer. He's huge. He's just had a great career, and he is. They've made him the highest paid nickel cornerback. He absolutely deserves it. He is a really hard guy to replace because you can find cover guys, but cover guys who tackle and play as tough as he does, hard to find.
Yeah, and I think those intangibles too, again, just having some continuity on the defense, having a guy who, when Taron was talking with the media the other day, was mentioning how, he knows how close they've been and what they still need to do to get there. It's just a matter of getting over that final hump. So a lot of turnover on this defense for sure. Like you mentioned, brought back a few guys, brought back Cam Lewis, who I think is versatile, but also a big special teams role.
I see him as a number 3 safety, so they still need to find a safety.
Yeah, no, there's still a lot of work to do on this defense in particular.
And one other signing to mention, they brought in Nick Morrow, linebacker, who really fills the role of Terrell Dodson, an upgrade on Terrell Dodson, has speed, can cover. He is not a starter in their nickel defense, but he can back up the line, be the linebacker, and play special teams. So that gives them a little more security at linebacker. So after reviewing the offense and defense additions, now let's talk about work left to be done. And there's a lot of it. And as we saw last year, Brandon Beane was able to bring a lot of people in the second, third, even fourth waves of free agency, if you will, to guys at the veteran minimum or very close to the veteran minimum. Katherine, let's talk about holes or positions that we think Brandon Beane can address at a low-cost level here before the draft or in the draft.
Yeah, to your point, I think there's still a lot of ways to go about this. I mean, Leonard Floyd last year, what was he, like June 6th or something like that when they finally brought him in? So both from the free agency as well as the draft, there's still plenty of time, obviously. Continuing on the defense for a second, there's just still a lot of work to do on this defensive line. Just to get more bodies in there, especially the way they rotate guys. There's still, I think, a little uncertainty with, Von Miller. The team believes in him and what he was looking like towards the very end of the season. But I think, what we saw last year was not the consistent level of play they were expecting from him. So kind of trying to figure out a way to get him back to where he was, but building around that too on the defensive line will be a need for sure.
Yeah, I mean, starting there, they certainly, I mean, if you've got Greg Rousseau and Von Miller, and you've got Epinesa as a number 3, but you'd really like a number 4 who could move into the number 1 or 2 role after a year. So, somebody like Chop Robinson in the draft, and that position more likely to be filled in the draft, perhaps. So drafting a defensive end at number 28, they're hard to find, is certainly a possibility. Defensive tackle, sticking with the defensive line, they need backups to both Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. So there's a place where they could get a lower cost free agent, and I expect them to do that at that position. And then we go to safety and cornerback. They need players there. They need a second starter at safety. If Cam Lewis is your number 3 and Taylor Rapp is one starter, where they get in the other one, I think that comes in free agency too, and that could come very soon. But I don't know, they could get a safety at the 60th pick in the second round of the draft. Do you want to start a rookie safety? I think their preference will be to sign a veteran there. And then cornerback, they need a 4th cornerback too.
Yeah, I think safety especially. I'd be surprised if they didn't bring in one more veteran there. Just kind of given the way Sean McDermott runs this defense too, of, when he brought in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, or when the team did, obviously, just kind of knowing that these are guys who you can squeeze more out of them once they're in this defensive system.
I mean, you look at like that, we have a month and a little 5 weeks to talk about this, but draft prospects. This is a Beane. Beane's MO is fill enough holes that you're not boxed in. So just this week, 2 of the draftniks, Mel Kiper has them taking cornerback TJ Tampa at 28 and ignoring Chop Robinson, the defensive end, and a receiver at 28, leaving a couple top receivers like Xavier Legette or Adonai Mitchell from Texas, passing on them to take a cornerback. I don't think fans would love that at all. Daniel Jeremiah has him taking a defensive tackle at 28 and ignoring receiver. And then all those positions on defense. Now switching to offense, X-wide receiver, you can certainly make a case to fill that in the draft, but there's a couple good, free agent receivers. I certainly think they'll take a receiver in the draft, but then interior offensive line, tackle, big running back, they have needs there. The interior of the offensive line, they got nobody right now backing up on the interior of the offensive line.
I think you mentioned wide receiver multiple times in there too, though. That's such a fun part of discussion around here in Buffalo right now as well, of just how badly fans want that, but what will the team actually do there? So I think that'll be really interesting, of just kind of, that balance of what happens if those guys are still out there when their pick comes up.
Fans would not bust a gasket if they went wide receiver. They're not going to do that. But like as I mentioned, interior of the offensive line, Alec Anderson, I think, is their lone depth guy at center and guard. I fully expect them to take an offensive tackle with one of their picks on day 3. They had Latavius Murray as their big running back. There are some good big running backs in the draft. Or they could fill one of those holes in free agency. So, Brandon Beane is going to look for some low-cost veterans who are absolutely out there, just like he did last year. Remember, he signed Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. So there's people to be had in free agency at a low cost.
Yeah, and still plenty of time too. We'll be back to record again before the draft, so definitely stay tuned for that. But make sure in the meantime you're reading everything you need to know on buffalonews.com and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts for just more information on what the Bills are up to.